Hi, folks. Welcome as you come in. Feel free to just get settled. My name is Danielle. I work in the advancement department. Many of you have already changed your names. If you could just go ahead and hover over your picture and change your name, feel free to put the town that you live in if you'd like. Just like to know who's here. And actually, if you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat, that would be great. So feel free to say, hi, I'm so-and-so, my student is so-and-so, and we live in wherever. We'd love to know who's here. For any of you in New England tonight, it is snowing a little bit. So I hope that's good news and not bad news for folks.
It is not supposed to accumulate, so I think
That's right. This is easy snow. All right, we've got about 17 people here. We had over 50 people registered, so this is obviously a hot topic and we're happy to have you. So give folks a chance to come on in. Thanks, Beth, for introducing yourself. Suzanne.
So nice to see so many familiar faces and at least names. Even if I haven't met you before, I've met your children, which is exciting.
Folks, just so you know, tonight is being recorded and we will share the recording after the fact via the newsletters, and then we'll have it available on our website as well, and you'll get the slides. So feel free to just sit back and enjoy. And we'll get started in just another minute. We'll give folks a chance to sign on.
The whole idea behind recording, of course, is to test, can I stand up to the anxiety of also being recorded during this? Nice double entendre for the topic.
You're always on theme.
That's right.
Oh, we've got Jenny here. It's a good group.
Feel free to make sure you have a snack or a cup of tea or an adult beverage. This is anything goes tonight for this journey together.
What about ice cream?
Of course.
You've hit my 7 o'clock ice cream hour. Folks, if you're just joining us, welcome. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and to change your name so we can see who's here. Just a reminder, tonight is being recorded and we'll get started in just a minute.
It's real life, right? The noises of the city, Danielle.
My goodness. Apparently my neighbors know something important is happening tonight. All right, everybody. I want to be respectful of your time, so let's kick it off. My name is Danielle Figuera. I'm the Director of Alumni and Parent Engagement here at Landmark. This is my 4th school year. Thrilled to be here, and this year we launched this program, Landmark Learns, where we virtually bring you a series of different topics and resources that are topical to the time within our faculty. So we polled some members of the parent community in the summer and asked what were some of the topics you'd like to touch upon, anxiety rose to the top. And I'm not surprised that when we sent the email out inviting you to be here tonight, over 50 people signed up. So it is obviously on many people's minds, mine included. And we are so thankful that we have Lara here tonight to talk about anxiety in the context of EMS, but also just share her professional and personal opinion. She's a wealth of knowledge and information, and we have her for about 50 minutes, 55 minutes. She'll go through her presentation. She may pause for questions during it, but we'll certainly leave time at the end for questions. Tonight is being recorded, so is the chat. So just be aware of that if you're sharing anything personal. We do look forward to your questions. And if you do have anything more specific that you'd like to follow up with Laura or another counselor about, you're more than welcome to, and we certainly encourage it. So thank you for being here. And Laura, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Danielle, for that introduction. So I hope tonight will give you a little bit of maybe sigh of relief over feeling like you have some new strategies to manage any anxiety you're managing at home with your children in your own life, because boy, is this the time we are all dealing with more anxiety in life. So I called tonight Standing Up to Anxiety because I think often there's this feeling like anxiety can take over, or that we don't want anxiety to be around. And the reality is it is, especially during a pandemic, going to be around, but we can stand up to it, and that's the best way to manage. So for those of you who haven't met me before, I'm Laura Sherman Pulvinen. I go by Laura Pulvinen at school because, as you imagine, Laura Pulvinen is enough of a mouthful. I'm the counseling department head, and I've also been a tutor in my past. So I know a little bit about what your students go through on a daily basis in terms of tutoring. And that really gives me good insight into some of their academic experience. I also have the privilege of having met all of your children before, whether it be in morning meetings or around campus, in groups, orientation times. So that's exciting. So I might not know all of the details of your students' experience, but I know who they are, which is nice. Oh, I should have said too, this picture I like to reflect on. This is a pre-pandemic picture, and I feel like I look so young and relaxed. So it's nice to look back and remember that that was true for all of us, right? So our plan for tonight, I like to start with a bit of humor. The human body is 80% water. So basically we're cucumbers with anxiety, which I enjoy just as a little bit of counseling humor. Because everyone has anxiety, and it is normal to feel anxious sometimes. Tonight, the plan is to talk about exactly what anxiety is, why it's important now in particular to talk about it, what it can look like and feel like, what we do at Landmark to manage anxiety and in general, and the most time we'll focus on what you can do at home. So I hope that will provide you some opportunities to ask questions. I'll stop at different intervals so you can ask questions along the way as they come up as well. And as Danielle said, if you have really specific instances or examples you'd like to discuss, I'm happy to arrange another time. I like to put an agenda up front because not only are agendas great things, especially for presentations, but it's really a skill in managing anxiety is to know a plan. Right? If you can know the plan, it helps you to feel in control. So that's a great strategy to use with your children. You don't necessarily have to show them a written plan, but reviewing what's going to happen can be really helpful in mitigating their anxiety. So what is anxiety? Anxiety is a totally normal body response to stress. We all have it. It's a feeling described as fear, apprehension, or worry, and everyone has worry. If anyone tries to convince you they don't, I'm not sure if they're living. 25% of children present with notable symptoms and behaviors of anxiety that kind of interfere with their life. It's not necessarily diagnosed as an anxiety condition, but we do know that about 7% of kids have diagnosed anxiety according to the CDC. A diagnosable condition means it's so persistent or excessive that the worry interferes with everyday life experiences like attending school, for instance. We know that anxiety is generally higher, especially anxious behaviors for students with learning disabilities and other comorbidities like ADHD. That always makes a lot of sense to me. And when I talk to students about that, if I had to do something that was hard for me for 6 hours a day, like I'm envisioning doing my taxes for 6 hours a day, I would feel anxious too, because it's the work of childhood is school for so many of our students. And that can be very anxiety provoking if it's not something they feel good at. Over time, we know that just categorically, anxiety can lead to depression. The body can only be anxious so long before it starts just kind of hibernating a little more and experiencing symptoms of depression. So we want to keep our eye out for that because obviously depression can interfere with life as well. Anxiety is not always a bad thing, but of course, when it disrupts typical life and enjoyable experience, that's when we start to have concerns about it. So, why talk about anxiety now? Well, we all know why. It's very timely with a pandemic, right? So, we know that stress and anxiety has four major triggers. When we feel something is new, we can feel stressed. When something feels threatening or unpredictable and out of our control, COVID hits all of those, right? So, you might see way more anxiety in yourself, in family members, and friends than you saw prior to 11 months ago. And we just know categorically this is true. You know, all of the rating says people are just more anxious, and they should be because we're experiencing a pandemic that is novel, threatening, unpredictable. We can't control it, and we're not sure when it will end. So I think tonight will hopefully be particularly helpful in managing some of the things you're seeing with regard to COVID. So what's happening? A little very, very basic neurology and neurobiology here for you. If there's any experts in the audience, I hope you can double check me. But you'll see the picture on the left is a slice of the brain from the side. And in the middle is a very tiny structure called the amygdala. Amygdala actually means almond, which makes sense because that's the shape it is. It's pretty small. And the amygdala is responsible for our fight, flight, and freeze response when we are upset or faced with something potentially threatening. So it's a very primitive structure in the brain. People often refer to, like in caveman times, if you were aware of a saber-toothed tiger coming, your amygdala lights up and tells you this is dangerous. And you would, of course, decide whether to fight, flight, or freeze in the moment. So the great thing about the amygdala is we still need it. It's something that would respond and help send a very quick message to your nervous system if you were to touch a hot stove and your hand would pull back very quickly. But my favorite anxiety guru, Lynn Lyons, describes the amygdala as a poor house smoke detector that can't distinguish between burnt toast and the house being on fire. So that's the part where you'll see sometimes yourself or your children having a large response to something that's not a true threat. And that's where we need to train the amygdala. So let's think about, does anyone want to throw into the chat something that a child might feel stressed about? It can be something benign or something that makes perfect sense to be stressed about. Social situations, perfect. So the triggering event might be, I have a new lunch seat tomorrow, right? So they're not even at school yet. It's not happening in the moment, but that triggering event caused a worried thought. Okay, my best friend's not gonna be at school tomorrow. I'm gonna have a new lunch seat. I'm feeling kind of anxious about it, right? So the amygdala starts firing. It starts sending messages to the brain like, okay, it's time to panic. So then you start to get a physical reaction. Kids really enjoy learning about anxiety because they like how validating it feels to say, like, yeah, you know what happens next? Your stomach feels nervous. Your face gets red. Your hands get tingly. Your heart is beating. And when I describe these experiences, especially to adults, if your stomach is sick, your heart is beating fast, your face is red, your hands are numb, you feel sick, right? Some people would even say you feel like you're having a heart attack. And in that case, your body starts to panic more, right? It's got to be real. It's got to be real. I'm feeling all these physical symptoms. This is intense. And so your amygdala starts again, right? Because you're feeling these real physical symptoms. That causes another larger physical reaction and more worried thoughts. You know, I thought it was just a little bit of a small deal lunch tomorrow, but it's I need to panic. This is going to be terrible, right? And that's where you can see kind of full meltdown mode happening. So what we're going to talk about tonight is how to intervene in that response, because you can see it in action at times, and it's not abnormal that the body is making it happen, but we just need to get the amygdala under control to tell it you're having a smoke alarm for a burnt toast, not a fire. Let's see what we can do. All right. Questions? Does anyone have questions so far on kind of what is anxiety and how does it present? Awesome. All right. So, characteristics you can generally think of with anxious thinkers is they have trouble thinking globally. So, everything feels like an overwhelming task, and it's harder to break the steps down of something that needs to happen. This is especially true for our students with language based learning disabilities, where we know they benefit from micro uniting and having pieces broken down because the whole can feel unmanageable. Anxious thinkers have trouble tolerating uncertainty, which, especially during a pandemic, is really challenging. There's not a lot right now that can always be certain. And a lot of times when someone feels anxious, they're searching for that certainty, and you can't necessarily give it to someone. Some anxious thinkers have trouble being autonomous. Might need a lot of help and support at times that you're surprised that they need that. They can show poor problem solving skills, and it's not because they can't solve problems, it's because the anxiety is taking over. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Also, anxious thinkers can't envision their world without worry. So oftentimes we want to tell our kids not to worry, and they're like, "What's that like?" I don't know what that is like. And worried people worry about being worried, right? So I like to talk to kids about the fact that I'm not going to make their worry go away. I'm going to work with them to manage it because I think that feels more doable to them. So, what you might see at home, what we can see at school at times, is poor motivation. Kids who don't tend to initiate because they're not sure where to get started and they feel worried. Learned helplessness. If they haven't done something, someone will do it for them so they don't have to worry about it. Shut down refusal. Sometimes we see this. We see this less at Landmark because, as I'll talk about, how we teach our students kind of manages the anxiety that a lot of our students have. Task avoidance, class clowning, immaturity, school phobia at its worst for sure. And you can see poor emotional regulation. So I'll have parents who are telling me, like, I have a middle schooler who seems like they're throwing a temper tantrum. And again, we'll talk about what's going on in the brain, but it's because the emotional brain is taking over and that logical part is not in gear. Especially from teens seeing oppositional and argumentative behavior, oftentimes it's a cover for the anxiety that they're feeling. And then lack of stamina. Again, when you're anxious over time, it causes you to feel tired. So you can see that lack of stamina. So these are the 6 Landmark teaching principles. You've probably heard of them before. The reason I highlight them here is just to say that what Landmark does in its teaching and in every aspect of its teaching really helps kind of manage anxiety. So providing opportunities for our students to experience success is a huge piece that I'm going to talk about tonight. Anxious thinkers don't remember the good stuff. That's true for most of us in general, whether we feel anxious or not. Our brain holds on to negative more than it holds on to positive. So we are giving opportunities at Landmark for our students to see and remember their successes, and that really helps the anxious brain. We also use multisensory approaches, which helps integrate the emotional and the logical brain. So moving the body, using hands, acting things out can really help kind of moderate that anxious feeling inside and distract the amygdala a little bit. Micro-uniting, as I said before, helps break down tasks. If I know I have 2 hours of homework to do, but all I have to do is get through one 15-minute assignment first, it feels much more manageable. And then ensuring automatization through practice and review. That's a big one because when you start to do things automatically and you know you can practice and review it, you're not going to be as worried about it. It's not novel. And providing models. So knowing what you're aiming for is also really helpful. And finally, including our students in the process. And that's a big one for anxiety. We want students to understand their anxiety and not kind of talk around it, but be explicit with them. So that's really what Landmark does as a whole to manage anxiety. Of course, we have counselors who work with students as well, and different topics we utilize to discuss anxiety. We have mindfulness every day, but I'm going to talk now, shift more to what you can do at home. So in general, with anxious kids, we often try to focus specifically on what they're worried about. Okay, so you're worried about lunch tomorrow. What is it you're worried about? Are you worried your friends are going to be mean? Are you worried you won't know what to say? And we tackle all the different examples, and that can be really helpful in the moment. For some of our anxious thinkers, what happens is once they're not worried about lunch the next day, they're worried about the homework assignment they have tonight. And so instead of tackling the overarching worry, we've just tackled the specific instance. Something else we do, I'm definitely guilty of this, is trying to convince students it's going to be all okay. And the hard thing for them is they don't feel that all of the time. And especially in terms of a pandemic, we can't always guarantee that everything will be okay, right? We can't promise that everything at lunch will be just fine the next day. We hope it will be. And odds are nothing huge will happen. But if something does, they're going to lose some trust there in the moment. Sometimes we say we'll do it for them or fix it for them. I have a toddler and I feel like myself falling into this trap already of just wanting to like get out the door and do it. But we really need to have our students experience and go through the motions at times. Getting them out of a task. I've seen this a bunch where if you can convince your kid to go to math class, then you'll tell them they can leave school early at lunch. Sometimes that is a very useful tactic, but if it's something we use without being really explicit and intentional, our kids get wind of it and they're going to use it all the time as an escape. They're going to let that worry help them get out of things. And sometimes we try to make them comfortable. And the truth is that anxiety is uncomfortable and we need to help them move through it and work with it and tolerate that discomfort because that helps them build skills. So when we do some of these actions, it doesn't actually help our students gain practice managing their worry. We're kind of trying to take away the worry. So instead, we're going to teach our kids to tolerate discomfort. Discomfort is a normal part of life, and often they're going to grow from it. We're going to teach them to react to their thoughts differently. We're going to teach them to learn by doing, know that it's okay if they fail if we're providing a supportive, safe environment and help them figure out how to succeed. We're going to help them manage life uncertainty because the truth of the matter is it's true. It's an aspect of real life for all of us. We're going to help them be more flexible and problem solve on their own. That doesn't mean we're not validating what they're feeling. It doesn't mean we stop being present, and it doesn't mean we don't support them. But the next kind of few slides is going to figure out a way to help you get concrete tools in terms of what you can do next. So I see the question was, what's a different phrase to use rather than don't worry? Excellent. We're going to get there. Hold on just a second and see if I answer your question. So the first thing, I'm sure you know this, but I think it is helpful to say, we can't help our kids unless we are taking care of ourselves first, right? So children especially are sponges for others' anxiety. It is okay if we are anxious during this time, but we need to model that we're taking care of ourselves. So that might be on the left side, exercise, meditating, therapy, vegging out, reading, listening to music, cuddling with your pet, whatever works for you, talking to friends. Showing that it's okay to take care of yourself is a really important part of managing hard feelings, anxiety or otherwise. And then the modeling part is also the talking about what you feel, normalizing that it's okay to feel worried or nervous, and showing how you overcome obstacles, mentioning a strategy that you're using or a time that you've succeeded. And that can really help our kids to know that they're not alone in this and that adults are humans too, right? And we feel this. Obviously, you don't want to overburden your children with things that you're worrying about explicitly, but to say, especially during a pandemic, I'm worried too about the next time we're going to see grandma and grandpa, but guess what? We know that it will happen and we're going to, be together. And in the meantime, we're going to Zoom as much as we can with them. Those sorts of things to validate what they're feeling. So the question was, how can I, what to say instead of don't worry? The first thing is expect to worry. I would say the best thing you can teach your kids is expect it to happen. If you have a child who's a more anxious thinker or constantly worries, help them expect it. And the way to do that is to help them name their worry and talk back to it. We're going to talk about this in detail in the next few slides, but it sounds silly. But giving the worry an explicit name, I have students who have named their worry Amy the Amygdala, or Bob, or Audrey Almond. Any name will do, it does not matter. Preferably, probably not a name of someone else in your family. But that externalizes the worry and makes students able to talk to it and realize it's just a piece of them. Now, I've had adults say, well, it's kind of hard to get my high schooler or even my 8th grader to do this. And it can be, but you have to kind of let them be silly with it and even model a little bit too. So I always tell students I've named my worry Wanda and I talk to it. So if I am usually a little bit worried about social situations and I know that I have a new lunch coming up tomorrow, I'm going to say where's Wanda? She's got to be coming, right? I should expect her. It's a situation where usually she's going to turn up. And that gives kids some power in expecting. So instead of telling them not to worry, it's saying be ready for your worry, and it makes it less powerful in the moment. It helps us to then be uncomfortable on purpose sometimes, especially if you're trying to trigger worry at times, especially if you're thinking about, I was thinking recently about vaccinations and how students can be really anxious about getting vaccinations of any kind. And some of our students will start to feel anxious about people in their lives getting vaccinations. But if you can prepare to be worried or trigger the worry and think about a situation where it might happen, it helps you to be on the offense a little bit and to think about what's going to happen and talk through it with your children. So we can perceive and manage our symptoms better if we're the ones in control rather than letting worry happen and surprising us. It also will immediately modify the amygdala response, because if you're anticipating something to happen, the amygdala doesn't light up in the same way. Your logical brain is involved. And it causes the amygdala to then cool off and send a different message. Breathing's a really powerful strategy. Even just modeling like a big deep breath for your kids when they're starting to feel anxious, even if you don't say to them breathe, oftentimes we just mirror what people in our lives do. So if you're like, they might just do it. And it does really reset the brain. Now, breathing doesn't take away worry, but it will reset the amygdala a little bit. So for some students, doing a form of meditation is really effective. There are other worriers where meditating is going to feel terrible to them. They're going to worry more. They're not going to enjoy the stress of kind of sitting in a quiet space. So you have to figure out what might work for your family. But it does really help with that reset so that the worried thoughts aren't in that triggering, spiraling circle. Reminding your student to know what they want. So if we use the lunch situation again, what they really want is to be at school and to have fun. We're not going to let Wanda worry get in the way of that, right? We're going to take worry by control, expect it, and know that what you want is to feel more comfortable. So what can we do to make that happen? And kind of make a plan. And then see how it goes and circle back to that success. So if a student was like, actually, it was pretty good, you're going to remember it. You might even write it down or draw a picture and circle back to that. So the next time your student feels worried about something of the same topic or a different topic, you can discuss what you did the last time and how it worked. And the final thing is to take action on the plan, reminding them that they have the power to work through the worry and that you're going to help them do it. So let's break this down a little bit more. So I mentioned before, there are kind of two parts of the brain. There are lots of parts of the brain, but for the purposes of talking about anxiety, we think about the downstairs brain as the more emotional, primitive part of your brain, and the upstairs brain, which tends to be here, like the frontal cortex, the more logical part of your brain. So it's often helpful for students to understand that the parts of our brain work best when they communicate and talk to each other. Kids really tend to understand like that they can feel their emotional brain take off when they start to have that anxiety spiral. What's going to happen? This could be terrible. It's going to be so much worse. That their logical brain isn't thinking anymore and isn't involved. So if we can do things like breathing exercises or talking back to worry, that gets the logical brain involved and helps the emotional brain to chill out a little bit, which is really what we want. Now, we don't want the emotional brain to go away. It's a really valuable piece. It helps us to think. Anxious students tend to be highly empathetic and highly observant. So we don't want those qualities to go away either. We just want the brain to work in tandem. Another way to think of this is with this hand image. So the idea is your brain is kind of like your hand. Again, it's a little bit of a stretch, but your thumb is your lower emotional brain. And usually your brain functions like this with your thumb on the inside, and your logical brain is your fingers wrapping around, and your brain works together. Now, when you start to have a very big emotional reaction, they call it flipping your lid, where the logical brain gets far away from your emotional brain and they're not communicating. So by talking back to the worry, by taking a deep breath, by resetting, by thinking about a plan, you're getting the logical brain back involved. And some kids like to think of it, this is more for younger kids, giving your downstairs brain, your emotional brain, a hug. So if that helps, please use the visual. Visuals help with a lot of our students. Even some of our older ones just like the idea of understanding what's happening in their brain, even though they're not going to use the like flip the lid image. You're probably not going to see a 12th grader be like, just flipping my lid right now, a little bit anxious, right? But they might think it in their head. So let's go back to teaching your kids at home. The first thing is teaching them about anxiety, teaching them to expect to worry, naming their worry in particular, and talking back to it, right? So again, you might say things like, all right, I know I have to do this new thing today, so I'm going to expect to hear from Wanda. What's Wanda going to say? Wanda's going to say, you can't do it. You should be afraid. You don't want to go to school. People are going to be mean to you. Predict all the things and play through the script of what the worry might tell the kid. It's called externalizing. It's a very common tactic for any big emotion, is just separating what our brain tells us from what actually is us. And it helps students to understand the difference between them and their power versus what anxiety is telling them. It also helps them to think a little bit about anxiety like a bully. Anxiety wants control and wants to tell you what to do, right? But if you're talking back, it doesn't get to decide. So that's where predicting and even telling it to go away. Sometimes I have students who like to draw pictures of their worry and throw it in the trash. I had an 8th grader one time say, like, if I have my parents' permission, can I light my worry on fire? And I said, okay, well, let's check in with your parents about that. But in a controlled environment, if that feels successful, there are lots of creative ways to tell your worry to hit the road. And then celebrate the success. Even if they feel a little bit of relief in the moment and they still feel anxious when they're in the situation, there's that success and that practice. They're going to need a lot of practice talking back to their worry. It takes a lot of time, and helping them to be patient with that can really help. It is silly to be okay. It is okay to be silly. It is okay to be direct. Sometimes we want to dance around worry because we're worried about making our kids more anxious, but be direct. Say, this is likely to make you anxious. Let's talk back to it. Let's figure out what we can say. And even name your own worry as a model. Like I said, sometimes I talk a lot to Wanda with my students, and I think they laugh, like, you're a counselor, shouldn't you know how to manage your worry? And it's like, but I'm a human. I have real worry and I have to talk to it sometimes. So now would be a great time, I think, to take a few questions before we discuss some more strategies.
Folks, if you want to unmute, you're welcome to ask a question too. You don't necessarily have to put it in the chat.
I should also ask if that answered the don't worry question.
It did answer my don't worry question. Thank you. Laura, can you mention another strategy for, you talked about sort of, we definitely have students who sort of revert to younger behaviors when they're anxious. What are some tactics? I know you mentioned some, but can you give another example of a way to sort of pull them out of that mode?
Yeah. So one of the big things to notice for your child or your student is what's happening in the moment. Are they in that place where the emotional brain only is involved, or is the logical brain there, right? So if the logical brain is nowhere to be found and you can tell they're either in panic mode or actually having a panic attack, what you want to do is get their brain to be thinking again. Because what they're in is that spiral I showed you at the beginning, that anxiety spiral where they cannot think, they cannot process, they probably might not even be able to talk to their worry. So we're actually going to talk in a few slides, but just to preview that a little bit, get them moving, get them to do something totally different, distract them, any way to get their logical brain back involved. For some kids, it might be a snack. It might be a drink of water. Obviously, if they're hysterically crying, probably putting water into their body is not a good idea, but can you get them moving? Do they like a big hug? Can you put on a funny video? Is there a trick the dog does that always makes people snap out of something? See if you can find a few tactics on hand. I have a few students who like big sensations, so they keep like Listerine strips around or cinnamon gum, something strong that's gonna kind of hit them and cause their amygdala to hit pause a little bit. And then you can start to talk a little bit more about strategies. But strategies don't work when emotions are fully taking over. So when you see kind of those totally reverting back behaviors, you're going to want to get the logical brain back involved. How is it best to handle avoidance? Yeah. So super challenging, especially when all kids want to do is avoid. And that is a time that rewards can be really useful. So in general, I'm not someone who's a fan of rewarding unless it's intentional. But for a lot of our kids in social situations, even school situations, the motivation is so hard for them because they don't believe it's going to work. You know, they haven't seen it work for themselves before. So they're kind of like, you're just asking me to go on blind faith that I can do this. I'm not sure I can. right? And so trying to make an agreement or kind of a collaborative decision with them about what they can get through or what they can try. So I know a parent who used to say that her son would never try anything new socially and wouldn't do field trips. He wouldn't try new sports. He wouldn't even attend sports. So she had to kind of figure out what was going to work for him. So the combination that worked was not previewing too far ahead of time, because she found if she told him a week or two ahead, he would dig his heels in then. The conversation would start every night. He would try to wear her down. I'm not going to soccer. I hate soccer. I don't want to go. I'm tired after school, kind of all of the different excuses. So she would still give him a little heads up, usually a day or two before. And then there was some sort of pairing or kind of agreement, right? Figuring out something he liked. So in his case, he really enjoyed donuts. And so they would find a new donut place on the weekends. If you can make it to 3 out of the 5 soccer practices, then we will get a donut. It doesn't have to be 3 consecutive. It doesn't have to be 3 full soccer practices, but you have to show up 3 times. And then discussing that once you're able to do this, we're going to change the reward. So helping students understand the reward is to motivate your anxious brain to be able to try something. It's not because you as a human need the reward. It's because we're trying to teach your brain that this is a healthy risk to take. And at some point, you're not going to need the reward and you're going to enjoy soccer, right? That might not be true for all kids. Some of them are going to say like, I'm not anxious about soccer anymore, but I just don't like it. And then you have to figure out, your kid best to understand if that's what's happening or if it's still kind of a ODD sort of aspect. I think in general, that can also be a time to figure out what it would look like for them. Like, what would it look like for you to feel like you could do this? And see, sometimes I'll use what's called the perfect situation question with kids. If this were perfect, if your life were perfect, what would make you feel like you could do XYZ that you're not willing to do? Sometimes kids don't have an answer and they need a little while to think about that. Other times it's like, if there were unicorns around, I would do it. Obviously, I can't make that happen, but trying to figure out if there's anything in their perfect situation that I can try to make happen for them to feel more comfortable. What if there's a larger concern to their anxiety, a bully at school? Great. So if there's truly a bully at school or someone who is causing your child's social stress, they have a reason to be worried. And you can still help them manage the worry, but you also need to help them know that the adults in their life are taking care of them. So I would really recommend reaching out to the administrative folks at school who can help manage that and can be aware. A lot of times our kids are anxious that they're going to have retaliation. The thing I can say pretty confidently at Landmark is because it's a small community, I think we manage retaliation pretty well. If you have a kid at a larger school, again, I would trust your judgment on the school system, but it is hard to tell a kid not to worry if truthfully they're feeling bullied and ostracized at school, right? And to teach them to talk back to their worry is great. But if you're saying like, of course you're going to be worried, you're worried Jim is going to say something. Well, if Jim says something every day, that's going to make it pretty difficult to kind of overcome that piece. So I think it would need to be in tandem. Make sure your child knows what the general plan is to talk to administrators to minimize and address the larger problem, but also help give them the skills. What can you do if this happens? Who should you talk to if Jim is bothering you? Does that answer that question? All right, so I was going to show this video, but we're not allowed to show videos. So Danielle is going to throw the link in the chat. You don't need to watch it right now. It's also going to be in the resource list. But this is a great video of Bill Hader, who's a famous actor, if you know him at all, and comedian, excuse me. And he has dealt with anxiety for his whole life. And he didn't really start to think about his anxiety till he was an adult. And he talks specifically about talking to his anxiety. This video, I think, is great, especially for middle schoolers and high schoolers, to see that it's not nerdy, it's not weird to talk to your worry, to expect it. Even famous adults can do it. And I found him pretty inspiring. So feel free to look it up if you have a student who might benefit from seeing it. All right. So providing structure, something else you can do besides just the talking back to the worry piece, is figure out how much you're able at home to provide boundaries and structure and routine. worried kids really benefit from this. We see it at Landmark all the time. Kids who come to Landmark who are so anxious at school, and as soon as they get into a classroom and know what the expectation is of them, they know what the agenda is every class, we start to see a different kid. And that can be true at home too. Now, we don't expect you to run your home like a classroom. That would be no fun for you or for your children. But if you can be pretty consistent about what your boundaries and expectations are and help them to have a general routine, that can really help a worried mind because it provides that sense of consistency. At the same time, life is life. You can't structure it and provide all routine. So you're going to prep them for changes in their schedule. When you've made a routine and you need to change it, do what you can to prepare them, or even invite their worry. I have to let you know that we were supposed to go to the barn this afternoon, but we can't. And we know that Wanda worry is going to start to be uncomfortable about the fact that our routine is going to look different tonight. And kind of invite that conversation and prepare them as best you can. Model your reaction to changes. We are humans. At times, we're going to have big reactions too, because we have feelings. But the more you can model your reaction to change and just to different things and even talk them through it, the more they'll see that it's okay, that life is okay when things change, that you don't have to have certainty to feel calm, that we can create a level of certainty in ourselves in terms of how we can expect that life will change sometimes and how we prepare ourselves to manage worry and change. Try not to make promises about routines. You are not expected to be a magician in terms of making sure things happen the same way every time. I know that for me, that can be something I want to do sometimes with our students, to promise them that something will be a certain way, but it's ultimately not helpful because in the real world, things change and we can't always account for that. Help your students, again, expect their worry. I think the more you can do this, the better. And reward their flexibility. So if you have an opportunity when they were flexible or totally surprised you with not worrying, reward that. And the reward doesn't have to be in the form of a thing. It can be in your words, time with them, a special activity, or just noting it and saying how proud you are of them. And that will make them feel really good. All right, other strategies in general. Break down tasks. If your student is getting anxious about homework, for instance, help them break it down. Don't let them look at their whole assignment notebook at once. Ask them to pick their favorite subject and just focus on math in the moment. Again, especially at Landmark, we don't want parents doing homework for their kids. But if it's helpful for you to just say, like, you're just going to look at your math worksheet first, that can help kind of minimize the anxiety in the moment. This happens too with even silly things. I'll talk to parents sometimes who are surprised. Students get stressed about cleaning their rooms because they don't know where to start. Especially our students at Landmark, sometimes task initiation is a big challenge. So if you can help break down tasks for them, that can minimize some of the pushback you might get from kids, which can be rooted a little bit in anxiety or their fear of doing something wrong. Mindfulness. There are so many apps. If you want any recommendations, we use the Calm app at school. We use the Insight Timer. We use Headspace. There's a million free and pay for apps that you can check. Some kids like the voices that are super soothing and calming. Other kids think they're annoying. So figure out what works for your family. Mindfulness can be everything from guided, which some kids really like, tells them what to do and think, to just calming music or even like an aquarium scape to look at. Get their body moving. This is my biggest and favorite, I think. Like I was saying before, if you have a kid who's having a very anxious moment, if you can move their body, moving their blood around helps to reset everything. The blessing of winter is a few moments in the very chilly outdoors can really help reset your mind a little bit. It doesn't mean that their anxiety will disappear, but it's going to put a pause on that amygdala response. Especially with all that we're feeling right now in terms of the pandemic. If you can get outside, I know access to outdoor space isn't easy for everyone all the time, but take a quick walk, even just down the road and back, can be really helpful. I have a student who committed this year. His New Year's resolution to manage his anxiety was to walk his dog every day, which is a great idea. Adjust the path. So what I mean by this is that in general, we don't want your expectations of your kids to change in the long term, but that doesn't mean it doesn't change in the short term. I was talking to a parent whose daughter kind of seemed to just develop anxiety more recently. And she used to love going to dance class, and now she's getting panicked at dance class and she's not sure why. And so what they've done is they've started to put a plan in place where she'll go to dance class. She tends to be fine for the first 20 minutes. And mom has told the teacher to suggest that she can take a break or she can leave after 20 minutes if she wants. And that's not the forever plan because they don't want her just avoiding, but because she knows that her teacher will give her that option, she hasn't left a dance class since. Now, that's not the case for all kids. Some kids might need to leave sometimes and know that they have the out. But the idea is that you're adjusting the path with them knowing and with the plan being to eventually get back to the place where the full expectation is there. Like I said before, use rewards wisely. It is not unheard of, especially for us as adults, to need motivation to do things we don't want to do. It's easy to feel motivated on things you want to do that you're feeling like you're missing out on, but doing things you don't want to do, sometimes we all need a little reward. And then there's also the option of planned exposure. So especially if you have a child with a specific phobia of something, getting them some planned exposure can be helpful, where you put them in a situation where they know ahead of time they're going to be a little uncomfortable, and you start very small and you provide reward and lots of praise afterwards. And that can help them a little bit, just to say like, wow, how did you do that? How were you in the presence of that trigger in the moment? You felt your amygdala going, you felt your heart racing, and you did it anyway. What was that like? And what they're going to start to learn is that anxious response isn't going to kill them, right? They're not going to die. And the amygdala starts to alter a little bit. So another piece of advice is check out Lynn Lyons. She is my anxiety guru and go-to. She's incredible. She has parent workshops. She does a podcast. And she is really one of the pioneers about this talking to anxiety and focusing on building skills overall and not accommodating, because some manners of dealing with anxiety look more at accommodation. And as we feel like at Landmark, you would never tell your student they don't need to learn to read, that it's fine. We're the same way with anxiety. We're not going to tell them they don't need to learn skills to manage anxiety. They're going to have to manage anxiety at times on and off the rest of their life, because we're all human. And what we want them to have is skills to feel prepared to do it, even though it's really hard work. So some final reminders: worry is normal and we don't want it to disappear, but we want to teach our kids to manage it. We want to normalize it and also provide them some skills so that they know they can help manage what's happening and that it isn't always comfortable and pleasant to feel. We don't want to accommodate worry. The more that you let your kid kind of feel worried or feel like the worry controls them, that prevents them from doing things that they want or that you need them to do, the more power the worry gets, right? So if a student is worried about a social situation and you tell them they don't have to go into it, that might need to happen a time or two specifically, but you need to be really intentional about it, because otherwise the worry gets bigger and bigger and bigger. We call it a worry hill, and the worry hill feels like it becomes a mountain, and the only way to get over it is to go, the only way to get through it is to go over it. Because otherwise that bully gets very powerful. When kids build skills, they use them for any feeling, not just worry. So that can be really helpful too. If you find your kids have big feelings of anger or frustration or sadness, even, kind of knowing different skills are translatable among the different feelings. And I would say the biggest thing is help is available. Please reach out to us at Landmark if you feel like we can be helpful. As a parent, boy, have I learned that we are not all experts in everything, but we are experts in our children, and we're not expected to do this all alone. There are hard things that we're doing, and you're doing right by your child just by doing whatever you can for them. But the more we can help, if there are aspects that will make your life easier and them happier, that's what we want for them and for you. So questions, we've got some time for questions. I've wrapped up in record time, which means I probably spoke too fast.
You did a great job, Laura. That was really helpful, and particularly all the instances where you gave examples and you talk about different families you've worked with and students and parents and strategies. It's very helpful to hear.
Sure. If you have a specific situation you don't want to ask a question about, you're always welcome to call or email me. I'm happy to talk it through. These recommendations are obviously very blanket, but I can help you kind of craft a plan for your specific family need, because it isn't, one size fits all.
Laura, this is specific to this year, but have you noticed students having increased anxiety about the remote versus in-person weeks? and sort of if there's like a predictable spike that they're experiencing?
Yes, so that is a great point to bring up. So I would say it depends on the student, but the answer is yes. So we have students who are more anxious about being remote and students who are more anxious about being in person. And I have a student I actually met with last week who was going to be on campus this week. And we met on Friday to prepare for what her worry would tell her Sunday night, because she gets anxious about being on campus. She gets anxious about being away from her family, about wearing her mask all day and not having breaks as much, if she'll have all her materials. And so we talked about all those things that her worry would start to tell her on Sunday night. And we also talked about the fact that she shouldn't expect to feel happy and excited Monday morning. And I think that was a relief in itself of, if you're anxious or if you're not looking forward to something, let's not think that you should be happy and like jumping in the van Monday morning. Let's prepare for real feelings. And I think it made her more able to manage it, to know it was coming. And so we made a plan, and she and her parents were able to talk back and kind of predict exactly what her worry would say to her on Sunday night. And also, she's learned that preparing ahead of time helps. So she actually packs her bag on Friday. And so she knows that's done. She doesn't have to double check and worry about all the different pieces. I have another student who is not always sure she's going to have all her materials for the remote week. So she has a checklist. And that really helps, especially if you have a student who tends towards kind of an OCD sort of checking of behaviors. Having a list, and we can laminate it at Landmark, or give you a, what's it called, a plastic sleeve, so she can check it off. And that helps, because then if she becomes worried, did I pack my agenda, she can look at the list. And list making is great for so many of our students anyway, in terms of their executive function. It's a good life skill to have.
Awesome. Thank you. I know that's unique to this year, but probably translates to a lot of different areas for our kids.
And it happens for students in non-pandemic years after weekends, right? Just adjusting to being back on campus, or after long breaks, or times when kids are sick. And kind of that sort of preparation is really helpful, of just remembering it's normal and okay if you feel worried coming back to school after a long weekend. Or in a pandemic, I had a few students say, like, I had a break, but it didn't really feel like a real vacation. So I'm like, yeah, that's okay. Let's normalize that. And what can you do about it? How do you get through anyway? Well, feel free to send me a message or stay on if you have questions and want to just marinate a little bit. But otherwise, please enjoy your evening. You will get my contact info if you don't already have it in the slides, and you can keep checking them out and see what you think.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you to all our parents and guardians who joined us tonight. We so appreciate you being here, asking good questions, and partnering and supporting your students. So be in touch if you need anything, and you'll receive the slides, resources, and this recording. If not this Friday, then the following Friday. Take care, everybody.